a watch is more than just a trend. If you really understand what goes into the watch that gets developed, you would go after a watch. And that's what a lot of collectors do. During the Hajj era, Rolex, of course, was a main brand that came into the market. Rolex was one of the first brands that entered into the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Creating successful companies in today's modern time with technology and digitization, yes, the paces get quicker, but again, it all depends on execution.
He comes to you and he says, I want to buy my first watch. What kind of questions do you ask? And what do you usually recommend? What does your watch say about you? In this episode, we had the opportunity of having Mr. Khaled Zain Alabedin, an angel investor and a watch collector. We talked about watches and the history of watches and the economical aspect of watches, how it started, how it got into Saudi Arabia, and how it became a trend. And we talked about different kind of watches, different brands of watches, and what does a watch truly say about you? Enjoy this episode. Mr. Khaled, thank you very much for being here.
Pleasure is all mine.
Thank you very much. So, before we start, I went to your profile and it's kind of a mix of a thing. So, you are a venture builder slash watch collector slash too many things involved. So, if you please, in summary, who is Khaled? Which Khaled is Khaled, the one who is with us at the moment? And how did you get all these things mixed together?
Sure.
Yes.
First, it's a definite pleasure to be with you, Murtada, today with your podcast. And just a brief about myself. My name is Khaled Zain Alabedin. I wear two igals, as you know, with everybody says two hats. I wear actually two igals. The first one, but they are related somehow because of entrepreneurship, being a serial entrepreneur. So there is coherence and synergy between both. But my main background is I'm a venture capitalist. So entered the world of private equity and venture capital, mainly through investing in companies in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. I am I'm an investment banker by background. You know, initially in my career started as a banker and focused on private equity and venture capital. Later on, I was proud to be a member in Uqal, عقول وأموال, Minds and Finance, which is the first ever angel network set up.
2015, correct? Or 2014?
2011 is when it started.
Oh, okay.
And from there on, it basically continued and grew into the biggest angel network in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia.
Yes.
So from there on, this is where my love, I come from an entrepreneurial family and a trading family, and entrepreneurship, setting up businesses was always something that I adored and wanted to do during my young age. Investment banking helped me because again, I was focusing on private equity and venture capital. Private equity being private companies that get turned around, growth, and then they either list or they sell. Venture was more close to me because it's from the ideation, putting the idea until growth. But this is where I basically left my investment banking career and set up my own investment firm with a group of other families that in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia that were partners. So 4 years prior, I set up Bonat Ventures.
Munat.
Bonat meaning builders,
Builders.
i.e. builders of companies.
Correct.
And I was one of the last sons of Uqal. So I'm still I'm a board member in Uqal. And I'm considered, I believe, one of the last sons of Uqal that set up his own firm. Today, mashallah,
The old guard.
Uqal, most of the members of Uqal, mashallah, tabarak rahman, today they have set up their VC and private equity firms. And they're one of the leaders in the industry within the Kingdom of
So
Saudi
Aqal
Arabia.
started it all in that sense.
Well, Uqal was the flair because it was the first community that brought together venture capitalists or members that wanted to invest in startups in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, of course, even prior to the technology, investing in tech.
Mhm.
When it was set up at first, it was SMEs,
Mhm.
startups that not necessarily were into tech. Then it evolved into technology,
Mhm.
and mashallah, today the best venture capitalists and venture funds today came out of Uqal.
Mhm.
So I was one of, as I mentioned, one of the last sons of Uqal that set up his own
Mhm.
firm and fund. Bonat, i.e., builders. Bonat in Arabic is,
Oh,
is builders, and we
correct.
are builders of companies. So the whole focus of Bonat is basically two-tier. One is to build through or venture build, basically companies through coming up with ideas, sourcing founders, and then taking it to the next level. And like any other venture firm, invest with startups but with a hands-on approach. So with
In what sense, if I may ask?
when we say hands-on approach, it's not just writing a check. It's basically supporting these founders to open up networks for them, to support them through the infrastructure that we could bring together
Mhm.
on board to these companies and founders that would help them scale and also grow at a faster pace
Mhm.
during their company's life cycle. So with that said, we when we set up our first fund, when we invest purely in Saudi companies only,
Mhm.
and we have our criteria also entails that one of the founders has to be Saudi. So
Mhm.
today, the core focus of our fund and our approach is to invest in local companies,
Mhm.
Saudi companies, specifically in Saudi founders. When you ask me why, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia today, when compared to the Middle East region and not just the Gulf region,
Mhm.
by far has all the metrics and addressable markets in terms of size, talent, infrastructure for technology.
Mhm.
Saudi Arabia today ticks all the boxes for any venture capitalist
Mhm.
that wants to invest. So, talent, we have abundance of local talent, high caliber and high quality local talent. We have the IT infrastructure. The kingdom is one of the most highly affluent population when it
Mhm.
comes to digitization and actually using digital platforms and applications. And
Yes.
so all of these basically encourage any investor to invest in the field.
Mhm.
And by doing so, through our first fund, I was lucky to be one of the main investors in Ninja,
Oh, okay.
which is today the fastest growing unicorn in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia.
Okay.
Mashallah, the team is. Well, I always say this when it comes to with entrepreneurship, whether it's venture capital or any form of entrepreneurship, it's always the team. You invest in a winning team and a team that
Mhm.
could execute, and that's where you see basically
I know
companies.
it was growing, but is it growing like the fastest growing in the
It is
Mm.
considered today, Lillah alhamd,
Mm.
Ninja is basically the fastest unicorn, I believe, in the history of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia.
MashaAllah.
Well, and we always say, hopefully, when we get the exit, we're targeting, inshallah, the guys are working on listing,
Mhm.
on tadawul, inshallah,
Inshallah.
in the coming years. So hopefully we'll reap the fruits of our of the investment بإذن الواحد الأحد once
No.
hopefully the IPO takes place. So this is one company. We've invested in a company called PetroApp. Again, very early stage, interesting company based in Saudi.
Mm.
Recently, one of the biggest private equity firms in Saudi Arabia,
Mm.
being Jadwa,
Mhm. Yes.
did an acquisition. We also invested. We've invested in about 28 companies. So the
Yes.
most high profile is Ninja, Petro App, Abian,
MashaAllah.
Capital in fintech, Wadaya in
Mm.
fintech, and we've recently also invested in a very interesting couple of portfolio companies as well.
Can you disclose them all?
Of course, I mean, today, if you go on the website on, bonat.vc, you'll see our portfolio companies, you'll see who we invested in.
Mm.
And Lillah alhamd, we have a very good portion of the portfolio that has grown and also shown up to be leading companies within the segments,
Mm.
within the startup realm or the segments and sectors they're in.
If I may ask, now, before going to a different subject, since you said that you were apart from 2011, the
في
first,
عقال, yes.
yes. What I want to ask, since you have seen the change throughout this time frame, since 2011 to our current time, what were, you would say, of course, the major changes, the announcement of the vision, but I'm talking other than that. I'm talking specifically on a cultural perspective. What were the biggest changes that you as Mr. Khalid, you thought, yes, we are going there. We are going faster than anyone else.
Today, again, as I mentioned earlier, if we look at it from an ecosystem perspective,
Mm-hmm.
from an economical perspective, and looking at the ecosystem in any developing country or country that's getting into quick development is certain metrics like availability and abundance of human capital,
Mm-hmm.
infrastructure for capital markets and fundraising, i.e., the availability of funds, whether it comes from the private sector or even capital markets, i.e., the soundness and solidness of capital markets, for listings, IPOs, what have you. In addition to infrastructure, and when I say infrastructure in today's modern world is basically technology infrastructure and the infrastructure to capitalize on technology. Today, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, when compared to its peers in all Gulf countries, we're fully dependent on oil and gas.
Mm-hmm.
With Vision 2030, the focus was on not being dependent on oil and gas. And that vision we have seen being executed, mashallah, in a very quick pace. And what is also augmenting and supporting it are the metrics I mentioned today. So today, any investor who wants to get into a market, the first thing, we say in Arabic, capital is coward. All right, silmal jaban. But today, any investor that would want to come and invest in the country would look at certain main points is the regulations are in place. There's a strong capital market. There's strong source of funding. And at the same time, also you have strong human capital as well as growth when it comes to population, when it comes to the consumption, and all these points basically to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is one of the leading markets.
Mm-hmm.
Today, طبعا, the kingdom, if you ask me about change, today, change in terms of regulations. Today, regulations are one of the best and top class, not only in the region but also from a
Worldwide.
global perspective. Today we have one of the strongest, if it is the strongest capital markets. تداول. We
Mm.
have, when compared, let's say, only on the Gulf region and Middle East, today the most solid and efficient market today is the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. So we have the strongest capital market. We have the kingdom has always had the venture capitalist mentality,
Mhm.
especially with the private family offices.
Yes. Mm.
They are always leaders when it comes to investing, whether it's cross border or it's regional. The openness of families, that have the funds or family offices to invest with youngsters with ideas. So that mentality was always there. And today, the kingdom is by far the best market today when it comes to any entrepreneur that wants to come up with an idea to be supported by. So there is accessibility to funds from the private sector, and talent is a very important point as well, as I mentioned. Today there is always in any market, specifically when it comes to the startup realm or the venture capital, I would say, scene. Talent is always the main
Issue.
issue, or it is the key element for a success of any company. Today, technology, especially in our world today, technology can be easily disrupted. Anybody can develop a technology stack. Artificial intelligence is also, we'll come up to a stage where I believe, you just, and it's now the case as well, you put in the metrics of what application you want to do, you've got platforms that would develop the whole technology stack for you.
Mm.
It's about people, it's about execution. So talent is very important. The kingdom invested in the creation of talent. And I believe the Vision 2030 even started prior, where you had the kingdom vesting in talent, local talent. So if you graduated from high school, and you received a scholarship. Today, the kingdom has one of the best scholarship programs when compared to the Gulf region, any country in the Gulf region. You have talent that has studied in Europe, the US, Far East Asia. You have Saudis today studying in Chinese
Correct.
universities, Korean universities. They speak Chinese. They speak.
My cousin is one of them.
Here you go. So, and today the kingdom invested in local talent. So scholarships played a role. In addition, as everybody knows, today the scholarship programs at once they started was also opening up to students who don't get scholarships but manage to get high grades on their own cost, and then scholarship they would be provided with a scholarship. This caused a huge number of Saudi nationals that studied abroad. I believe, I don't know the exact numbers, but I believe it reached to some stage at 250,000
Mhm,
students per year. So imagine late in the, I would say, the 2015s, 2018s, those numbers go and study abroad. They came back, they got exposed
mhm,
to the international market, and you have a solid talent with local talent, Saudis,
mhm,
but with solid talent that would basically take over, whether it's the corporate world, whether it's startups, whether so having that abundance of talent is a key thing when it comes to venture capital in the startup realm.
mhm,
And this is basically shaping up the market today. So the change is economically, culturally, regulations, all that changed within the kingdom, within Vision 2030 happened in a very, quick and well executable way where we reap the fruits today.
mhm,
And today, as you can see, once every year when the new budgets come on board, we see every year, mashallah, that the dependency of oil, there are new sectors that are basically being born in the kingdom. That's also creating new lines of business when that impacts our GDP today, other than oil and gas.
mhm.
So see, a good friend once on a podcast said this, with all due respect to all the other Gulf countries. He said the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is a sleeping dragon, and other countries within the Gulf are like small players. Like now, since the dragon is sleeping, you guys can play, but once the dragon is awake, uh, basically, the dragon is going to take over. And today, the
So it's
kingdom,
not awake yet.
it is awake, of course. It's but I'm sure, inshallah, it will even reach to certain, even
Levels.
higher levels. Today, the kingdom has what it takes to be a major economy in the region.
Mhm.
See, within the startup realm, as an example, if I go back to the industry that I'm familiar with, today Saudi has the biggest addressable market in terms of population, and today the population within the kingdom, the majority are the locals.
Could you please just on that addressable market? Could you please
Yes,
elaborate more? What does that mean? Because for some
yes,
audience, they might not
sure.
know.
Now, an addressable market for any business, when you want to develop a new business or a new idea, which you want to commercialize,
Mhm,
you need to understand what market you're targeting.
correct.
So your target market is defined as the addressable market.
Mhm,
So let's say today, if I wanted to develop, which we will speak about, business in watches, what's the size of the market? So if I'm setting up a business in Saudi, let's say within the watch industry, within the watches and luxury segment, how big is that market? The structure of that market, locals versus non-locals, tourists versus, so that's basically an addressable market.
mhm,
Now, today, when we say for the startup ecosystem and realm, an addressable, Saudi today has one of the best addressable markets in
mhm,
terms of size, in terms of talent, in terms of uh, affluence. So today, you have a very strong local population. The Saudis, the nationals, are the majority of the population,
mhm,
and the majority of the population are young, very well, very affluent, well educated, and when it comes to being consumers, they are high income consumers,
mhm,
and growth of income is also taking place. So that's why the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia today is a strong addressable market when compared, let's say, to our region, the Gulf region, uh, and the Middle East. In terms of now income, again, that income is disposable income is increasing because more jobs are being developed, and with Vision 2030, more jobs are being in place, and with that disposable income, that income will be basically disposed within the kingdom. So purchasing power is going to get strong,
Hmm.
and that's why a lot of industries basically are benefiting from some such growth, and a lot of businesses want to come and set up in Saudi Arabia, whether local or regional or international.
Okay, and one of which is your main
And
industry.
one of which is watches.
Exactly.
So
This is what I want to
yeah,
know more about. So, okay, we'll talk about the venture capitalist aspect. Now, I want to get more into the watcher collector aspect. So,
sure.
was it always there, or did a shift kind of came to life?
Personally, or even from a personal
Yes.
perspective,
So,
yes.
was it a passion that died and
Yes.
came back to
No.
life, or was it
No.
something else?
It was a passion, yes, since I was very young, and I've mentioned this even, I had a couple of Arabic podcasts which I was on. When in addition to the venture capital hat, a very close thing to my heart is watches,
Hmm.
and this started at a very young age. It started with, of course, my father. I used to, my father used to love watches, and I used to see what he used to wear, and that's kind of where it kind of kicked off.
And where did you get
Uh,
it from?
exactly, and one of and I started initially with Japanese watches. When I was at school, my dad really knew how to get me to be disciplined when it comes to grades, in grades, not disciplined in. So when it comes to grades, basically, I was always gifted a nice watch when I got good grades. And like, well, there were two things: Atari at
Okay.
that time, prior to the Nintendo and PlayStation and Sega. So Atari was the and watches.
Okay.
So when I passed and got good grades, basically, I would either get an Atari game or a Casio calculator. The
Okay.
Casio calculator was the one that kind of created the shift. And then there was a Casio watch, the Pac-Man Casio watch.
Okay.
So this is basically where it enticed me for the love of watches, timekeeping, and
It wasn't digital, right? There was no digital
it,
watches at
it,
that time.
it no, no, yes, of course, they were
Okay.
digital watches and quartz.
Okay.
So Casio basically, and the Japanese were the pioneers of digital watches.
Correct. It was really about
Uh,
it's about more about efficiency rather than luxury aspect.
correct, and we will get to that, of
Uh,
course. Being young, being 13 years old or 12 years old, or getting not getting a Rolex, no, getting a Casio. So every time I passed, basically, I got, so first it was a calculator, then it was the Casio Pac-Man, and then when I graduated from school, my father gave me an Omega Deville Onyx dial quartz, which was the first Swiss watch, and that's where the passion started.
okay.
And then when I got my first job, basically the first watch I got with my own money, and it was a bonus as well, was a two-door Hydronaut. So this is where again the passion started, and this is where I started.
Do you still keep do you
Of
still keep
course,
all your
of
watches?
course, of course. But the ones I used to get when I was, younger during school, the Casios, no, I don't know where they are right now, but their memory is always there.
But so don't you feel nostalgic and say, okay, I want to get them. Where can I
I
find?
do, I do have, yes, I do have the same pieces that I was given as a gift, of course, when
Okay.
my father. So bringing again, we'll get into watches, but why also I got into watches as a business,
Yes.
and part of the segment of the watches that I entered in is very close to the startup realm. Now, see, with startups and venture capital, it's all about starting from zero, from an idea, disrupting, and using technology and having the bandwidth and, let's say, the patience towards going through a life cycle of a business until you are into a place where you have growth and you stabilize. So there's a lot of challenges. The startup world is very challenging. To start up with an idea and create a successful company takes Nothing less than 7 to 8 years of hard work, dedication, uh, bumpy rides until you reach.
Don't you think that a lot, especially in our current time, people say it can be minimized to 2 3 years to just
Nothing comes up easy. Now, see, today, creating successful companies in today's modern time with technology and digitization, yes, the paces get quicker, but again, it all depends on execution.
Mhm,
And today, as a venture capitalist, when we invest in people. We invest in people that can execute. As I mentioned earlier, today, technology, anybody can come up with a technology stack. But when it comes to execution and hitting milestones and hitting numbers, this is where, you can have a company. Ninja, as an example, it became a unicorn in a year and a half.
mhm,
Usually companies take a longer cycle, but so yes, to answer your question, yes, it can. But again, it's not an easy ride. Fingers are not the same. Not all startups or not all businesses can turn around into growth and success with a very short period of time.
mhm,
So, coming back to the watch world,
yes.
why I say it's, we cross paths with venture capital or the startup realm is because I entered into a segment called the independent watches. And with independent watches, that sector within the watch industry is quite challenging. It's all about new entrants, similar to a new startup. You need to build your track record, your name, etc. And growth of these companies take time and take a lot of bumpy rides.
Mhm.
And I'll explain to you the watch industry. Let's get into
Please,
the watch
that
industry.
was my question.
Yes.
What it's about.
So the watch industry started, very early, and let me go back even to our own history and our own culture. We have a very rich culture and history in the Arabian Peninsula and in the Islamic world and empire. Today, timekeeping is an essence of our religion, of
Mm,
our way of life, of so time is always precious to us.
mhm.
How did our ancestors keep with time, especially during, let's say, prior to the Islamic era? Arabs were very well known in terms of measuring time through different,
Seasons or
what
calendars.
it was, calendars, seasons, the sand clocks,
Mhm,
the sun, putting in certain pointers where the sun basically, and that developed later on in the Islamic era, al-mizwala,
mhm.
which is a tool that basically we use to keep time in the Arabian Peninsula during the Islamic era. Of course, and keeping time with the prayer times
Huh.
was essential, and this is where a lot of tools and technology was developed. مثلا solar clocks
Mhm.
or watches,
Yes.
basically
Yeah.
that utilized solar, i.e., solar, sorry, sunlight, to be more
Exactly.
precise, sunlight. So they started knowing and measuring time
Mhm.
by the sunlight, where they would put a device,
Correct.
and that device, you would know that now it's Fajr time
With the
or
shadow.
Dhuhr time with
With
the
the
shadows, Maghrib time, and then night and what have you. So these were tools that were used. Of course, sand clocks were also used. And today, we had a lot of scholars in our history that actually were pioneers in time prior to the modern era.
Mhm,
Al Jaziri, as an example, he is a very well known scholar in the Islamic world,
mhm.
and he's considered to be the father of mechanical watches. Al Jaziri was well known to develop the elephant watch, the water clocks, and these were mechanical watches that told time, but through animation and movements, using, for example, water technology. Today, there are brands that use very high complications.
Yes.
So he was developing, Al Jaziri was one of the leaders in developing complications, but using water clocks, sand clocks, clocks that basically functioned with sunlight. So in our history, we do have a deep history of how we read time in the Arab and the Islamic world.
Mm-hmm.
Today, a lot of the recent watch manufacturers and masters use Al Jazeera as a very solid example. Today, if you even Google Al Jazeera and watchmaking, the watch industry has a lot of respect for Al Jazeera.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, this is something I also mentioned previously, but this is a very well-known story. But during the time of Harun al-Rashid, who was a caliph in the Islamic world,
Mm-hmm.
he had a mechanical watch that was working on water. And then every time the 12 o'clock hits or noon hits, two horsemen basically come in and hit a bell.
Okay.
So he presented this as a gift to a Roman emperor. And when the Roman emperor saw the movement, he was scared. He said, "This is either the devil, or this is either something that is not ordinary,
Magic.
a magic." So when they broke the clock or they broke the device, they
Okay.
found out that this was actually a device that runs on mechanics and runs on water.
Mm-hmm.
So coming back in our Islamic and Arab history, we have a rich history of actually studying, having tools mentioning time or using it to basically know time. That later on developed, of course, the watch industry globally. Prior to mentioning the era of the region, the watch industry started, in parts of Europe. Every day, everybody knows that Switzerland is the hub of watches.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Remember the again the story I mentioned.
Yes.
There were a lot of European watchmakers that started watchmaking in parts of Europe
Mm-hmm.
that were not accepted because they thought that their work was either devil related or
Yeah.
um,
During the dark era of Europe at that time.
yeah, not dark ages, but they were not looked at as like a craft.
Okay.
And then this helped also a lot of these watchmakers shift to Switzerland, where Switzerland basically incubated a lot of these watchmakers.
But if I may, I would
Yes.
like to go back because again,
Yeah.
I'm also interested in that history. So the Islamic era, and the Arabic Peninsula with Andalus and all these areas, they were pioneers in many areas,
Correct.
and one of which is timekeeping. So what I want to know is how did it shift? So or how did that shift go into the uh,
To Europe.
to Europe? Yes, what happened exactly? What was the main aspect?
See, as you're aware, with our history, Andalusia was
Mm.
uh, at at the realm of innovation and technology.
Yes.
And a lot of the Islamic scholars and as well European scholars studied in Andalusia. When Andalusia fell, a lot of the know-how, sciences, technology went to Europe,
Mhm.
where Europe flourished. And it was the Renaissance era in Europe.
Yes.
And the Renaissance era brought with it technology, innovation. And again, I believe, this is where the timekeeping, the innovation in timekeeping came to place. It was scattered. So if you really look into history, you see watchmaking and timekeeping was present in Russia. It
L-
was present
London as well.
in London. It was present
Paris. No.
in France. It was present in Germany. Today, a lot of the big brands actually have Germanic roots.
Mhm.
So a lot of by the way, in the watch industry, a lot of the brands have Germanic origins because the Germans are very handcraft. They like to
Very
use their
precise.
hands, precise. They like to use their hands, innovation, mechanics. So it was all scattered across Europe. The U.S., interestingly, the United States of America was a pioneer when it came to watchmaking. Japan was a pioneer and also timekeeping and watchmaking.
Mhm.
But of course, Europe was the main
Hub.
hub, and Geneva, Switzerland specifically, was the ecosystem that attracted all the craftsmen in the watchmaking industry to come and set up.
Mm-hmm.
So you have brands today that are as old as 1776 or as old as even this, the mid 1700s.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, in the watch industry, the first watches that came to market were the pocket watches.
Oh, yes.
So the pocket watches were, a gentleman in the in a European community, mainly businessmen, bankers, wanted to, time was very precious for them, so they used these tools to basically keep time. So the pocket watch was always in the pockets of. That's why it's called a pocket watch, because it was always in a pocket
Yes.
and with a chain. These watches were all mechanical. When we say mechanical, so you had to hand wind them. So they were based on a movement.
Yes.
That movement had to be wound so that you can basically get the watch to be functional.
Similar to the current ones, right?
I will get to that.
Oh,
So
yes.
today in the watch world, there is mechanical, there is of course mechanical automatic, and then there's quartz, which is battery.
Mm-hmm.
So the whole industry started with pocket watches, and then pocket watches basically became wristwatches.
Mm-hmm.
In our parts of the world, in the Middle East, we got introduced to pocket watches through Hajj, and now I'm speaking about Saudi Arabia.
Mm-hmm.
In the Gulf, in Saudi Arabia, Hajj was al-Hajj al-Umrah, of course, pilgrims that came from all over the world,
Cool.
brought with them, especially from Europe, from Asia, from other parts of the world, brought and introduced pocket watches to the market. When Saudi Arabia oil was explored, Aramco had a lot of engineers that came from outside,
Mm-hmm.
and those engineers brought watches with them, and this is where also watches came into the market.
So during, let's say, 19 or 18
No,
90s,
during I would say the 30s and 40s. The 30s and 40s where more pocket watches and watches started to get into the
but
market.
prior to that, were we,
Prior to that, of course, there was no wrist watches; there were pocket watches.
even Saudi Arabia,
Now,
we were.
now, those now again, if they now there is no record, of course, of watches coming in from the 1800s, or I would say the well-known records are in the 30s,
Mm-hmm.
the 20s and 30s, where basically a lot of watches started to come into the market. Of
Okay.
course, the Gulf region as a whole, the exploration of oil also helped, because you had a lot of the Europeans, people from the UK, from Britain, Great Britain, trade with India.
Yes.
All of that helped in basically getting in watches into the Gulf region.
Mm-hmm.
There are a couple of famous brands that entered into the Gulf region. West End, as an example, the West End watch, we call it Salib, the cross watch, because there was a cross at that time, so they used to define it as the watch with the cross.
Mm-hmm.
West End it's a Swiss company, but it came from India, British India. India, when trade with India, of course, the Gulf region has abundant and hundreds of years of history with the Indian subcontinent.
Mm-hmm.
So the Indian soldiers that used to come into the Gulf region, and from Britain, and as well the traders that used to travel from the region to India to bring basically goods and products, used to get West End, and West End came to the market.
Mm-hmm.
So then we started seeing retailers for a brand like West End and Bahrain, Al Khobar, Kuwait, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, and Oman, and so forth. And the
That was the first
brands,
introduction.
yes, of course, in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, however, during the Hajj era, Rolex, of course, was a main brand that came into the market. Rolex was one of the first brands that entered into the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia.
Mm-hmm.
And then you had other interesting watches during Allah yarhama brahmatahu ويكتب مثواه الجنة, Malik Abdul Aziz, our founder, our beloved founder of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. During his era and later on the era of the other kings, we saw brands like Universal Geneva. Universal Geneva has tremendous pieces that were dedicated for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. When Aramco was set
So
up,
they were custom made.
some of them were custom made, some of them were Of course, like with normal watches that
Mm.
were
For sale.
for sale that were sold. But today, a lot of these brands actually came in and started basically selling their watches, and the retailer started opening up. These watches started coming into the market. In addition, brands like Omega, Hamilton, again, Aramco, a lot of the Americans that came in, they love Omega. Americans, Omega, Oyer, before Tag Oyer, uh, Hamilton, the Hamilton is an American brand in origin. It's
Mhm,
Swiss American, but it has American roots. So a lot of the employees in Aramco actually, when they came into Aramco, brought those watches.
mhm,
So the Saudi Arabia, if you look at the historical watches that came in, Hajj and Umrah, and they brought in brands like Rolex, Universal Geneva, and the likes. And then during Aramco's era,
Who
the
brought them in, by the way?
of
Like,
course the foreign and the engineers. You see
mm,
today the engineers that
yes.
came on board,
Mm,
they started bringing in these watches, basically Omega, Hamilton, what have you. And then this opened up the market for watches. You see, today businessmen started wanting pocket watches because time is of essence. The traders, whether in Jeddah, Sharqiya, and Riyadh, they wanted to basically have timekeeping, and this got them to acquire watches to make sure that they know prayer times and at the same time also put their timekeeping for their businesses and
mm,
meetings. That evolved into basically retail, where families started taking in brands, bringing them to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and officially retailing these brands.
mhm,
Of course, mashallah, today we have families like Al-Attar Group, who are the pioneers of Rolex in the
mhm,
Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. This is a family that is known, the first thing you see Rolex, you see Al-Attar, and they are
mhm.
the ones that helped develop the market for Rolex in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and make the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia one of the biggest markets for Rolex.
I want to ask a question on that regard. I have two separate questions. One is cultural, and the other one is about the industry itself. So, the cultural perspective. Does the record show what was the first reaction of the normal day-to-day people when watches were first introduced? The pocket watch, the wristwatch. Did they accept it at first, or what was their first concern?
See,
Uh,
watches were always accepted because there was one important point, or I would say service that these watches did. It's telling you time and helping you with prayer times. And today it started off, as I mentioned, with tourists that used to, the pilgrims that used to come in, giving it to traders, selling it also to some of the traders. Traders and businessmen today, as I mentioned, time is of essence for them.
mhm,
So it was used as a tool for them to time keep their businesses.
mhm,
And others started to acquire these watches for basically knowing prayer times, adjusting to prayer times, and using it as a tool for timekeeping.
mhm,
With time, طبعاً, again, initially it started with that segment, but with time, people started wanting to use it as an asset, as a tool to help them with time.
mhm,
So when the wristwatch era came in, and this was well known not only in Saudi but in the Gulf region. The traders and businessmen used to have the pocket watches. They showcase they have a pocket watch. So as a trader,
mhm,
however, then it became a tool that was affordable, more affordable,
mhm,
and it was within the hands of everyone. So people started basically accepting and wearing watches to tell time,
mhm,
to whether to time keep prayer times or their day to day business.
mhm,
And this is where retailers started coming to place.
mhm,
So as we said, Al family, which today are pioneers in Rolex. I believe they reached close to 70 years as retailers of Rolex, and they are the ones that developed the Rolex market. You had other families that also introduced other brands. As I said, to the Universal Geneva came in, Patek Philippe later came on board,
mhm,
and you have other family groups as well that took over certain brands and introduced them to the market,
mhm,
and watches became more acceptable and there was a very key, and a key demand for watches.
That's the thing. So let's go back to 101 or 001 for those who don't know that much of watches. I myself included. I don't know that much about watches. So you mentioned a lot of names. Okay, Swatch, Patek Philippe, Universal as well.
Yes,
So could you please, let's say, what are, so I believe some of these brands is under a group, some of them are dependent,
correct,
independent. So
correct,
could you please, let's say, elaborate more on this ecosystem of
correct.
watches?
So I would summarize the watch industry as four segments.
Mm-hmm.
One, all the brands started as private family offices or trusts or independent brands prior to being owned by groups and what have you.
Mm-hmm.
But each one was started. Each brand started by an entrepreneur, a family, a watchmaker, then turned it into a business and got other investors and so forth. But today, the watch industry, in summary, modern watch industry today is divided into four segments. The first segment is mainstream, and when we say mainstream, these are brands that have either 100 years of history or over 100 years of history, very well known brand identities on the wrists of the majority of the world populace, and they are the main brands.
Mm-hmm.
And these brands include the likes of Rolex, Richemont Group, which owns today Cartier, the house of Cartier, the house of Cartier, which is a very well known name in the market. Langanzone, IWC,
Swatch,
JLC,
Swatch, or do this.
Swatch Group, which owns Omega, which is again a flagship mainstream brand. Harry Winston, owned by Omega as
Mm-hmm.
well, Glachoté Original.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got the counterparts in Japan, which is Citizen Group, which owns today Arnold and Son in Geneva. They own Bulova, which is originally an American firm or an American hat, I would say, Swiss American.
Mm-hmm.
They own Citizen watches. You have Seiko Group, Seiko Corporation, which owns the very well known Seiko. So these are the mainstream brands.
Okay.
And of course, you have LVMH, which owns Louis Vuitton, whether it's the fashion or the watches.
Mm-hmm.
They own Hublot. They own. So you've got the major groups,
The mainstream.
the mainstream. So that's one segment.
One second.
And usually the mainstream are very industrial. They produce large number of watches. They have sophisticated industrial, plants, ateliers. They produce in large quantities, and they're governed and structured as corporations and mainstream as mainstream. And as brands, they sell themselves. If you go to a Rolex store, an Audemars, or a Cartier, if you put a vending machine, with all the respect, if you put a vending machine, you will sell. So they sell themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Patek Philippe, all these brands sell themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you have a store or you don't have a store, they're considered assets today.
Mm-hmm.
So this is mainstream. The second segment or sector within the watch industry is the fashion brands. Now, fashion brands came to life mainly in the 80s, late 80s, 90s. They target a more, I would say, affordable segment. And again, they are owned also by corporates, or the licenses for the names are owned by watch manufacturers and corporates. The fashion brands include the likes of Gucci. For example, Gucci is a fashion brand.
Correct.
So Gucci has a line of watches. Lacoste is a fashion brand. They also have a line basically selling Lacoste watches.
Mm-hmm.
Swatch is considered as a watch brand, but also considered also as a fashion, I would say, a fashion brand. And
Okay.
usually fashion brands are Quartz. Most of them are not, they don't offer automatic watches. Quartz, fun washes, affordable, and basically the branding or the brands or the companies that own the licenses for the brands usually are, fashion and apparel watches,
Okay.
or brands that basically produce apparel. As I said, Lacoste, Agner, Adidas. So these are lines that they produce watches. The third,
Correct me if
sorry,
I'm wrong. So
yes.
in that, so the first thing was mainstream. So it's more
Correct.
about the watch. When it comes to the fashion brands, do they look at watches as an accessory, not as the main thing?
Of course, in all cases, you see, watches are tools for timekeeping and accessories as well. But with the mainstream, it's more a statement. It's luxury. It's the finishing. It's the movements. The complications.
Hmm.
Fashion brands are more fun. So it's more fashion. So they don't focus on the mechanics, the movements,
About the artistic
the
aspects.
the looks, the affordability,
Mm,
the ease of like their colorfulness,
mm,
the materials they use. For example, they use more plastics, rubber, etc.
mhm,
They're all battery, affordable, fun. So most of the fun work goes on to the fashion brands
mhm.
versus the more high end horology that goes into the
Okay.
mainstream brands.
Third one.
The third segment is a segment that basically I focused on and entered in, which is the independents. Now,
Hmm.
the independents were always there, and the mainstream brands at some point were independent brands. Then they became, either corporatized through acquisitions or through basically growth. The independents started getting attention, or especially as a segment, I would say, in the late 90s, or maybe early 90s, late 90s, where watchmakers, master watchmakers, part of it, of course, were master watchmakers that left mainstream brands and then set up their own,
Hmm.
or other master watchmakers that set up their own brand.
Hmm.
So today, like houses like uh, Patek Philippe, uh, Langenzona, other major brands, JLC,
Hmm.
Zenith, etc. There are certain master watchmakers at some point of time where they reach to a level where they are exploring to set up their own brands. They have the know-how. This is where they started setting up their own brands.
Hmm.
And when they set up their own brands, they created their own trademarks, their own. And with independence, basically, most of the work is hand finished. Very small numbers get produced. And this is where the era of independence started coming on board. So you started seeing master watchmakers leave some of the main big brands, set up their own, and then basically set up their own brands and put their mastery and
Craftsmanship and.
craftsmanship into basically the companies they set up. Today, an iconic name that is, I believe, me personally, as one of the most iconic independent watchmakers, or a watchmaker, or a watchmaker slash designer that redefined the industry and disrupted it, was Gerald Genta. Gerald Genta was the infamous watchmaker and designer that designed the infamous Patek Philippe Nautilus. That today there are hundreds of waiting lists or thousands of waiting lists towards getting it.
Why so, if I may ask?
His signature. See, Gerald Genta today is a icon when it comes to the watch industry.
Hmm.
So he designed the Nautilus. He designed the Patek Philippe's, of course, Nautilus. He designed the Audemars Piguet. The very well-known Audemars Piguet watches. He designed even with Seiko through Credor, which is the high end of Seiko, a specific line with his touches.
Hmm.
The Royal Oak, of course, sorry, with Audemars, he's the mastermind behind the Royal Oak. He also did his own brand, Gerald Genta,
Hmm.
that did iconic designs today that are the most highly demanded watches. For today, Gerald Genta is considered one of the fathers of the independent watch realm.
Hmm.
So the independents, basically, in summary, are brands set up by either master watchmakers or private families or individuals. Their production is very minimal,
Hmm.
from as low as 5 pieces a year up to 2,500 pieces.
Hmm.
Craftsmanship is very high. Handwork and the use of hand craftsmanship is very high. complications. So they focus on really more complicated watches and movements and complications that get developed in-house versus going to third party and sourcing them from third party.
And price wise, they are the highest.
Not the highest, but they are high. So today they are considered most of the brands are considered even higher than the mainstream brands.
Mm.
And today, very few people have access to these watches. Why? Because there is not a lot of production. Production, as I mentioned, is very limited. So that's why I see the independent world. As I said, why was the independent world very close to me? Because I still see the life cycle of a startup in them.
Mm.
It's you really need to have a lot of guts to leave, especially with master watchmakers. A master watchmaker is like, I don't want to use the term machine, but he has a comfort zone. He has a movement that he has developed or a process to do a watch. He's focused, he wants to do it. He wouldn't take a risk of saying, if he's working with an existing brand, he has the guidebook, he has the rule book, he knows ABC, and he moves on the book.
Mm-hmm.
Telling a master watchmaker to leave a secure job and to go set up something new and to create a business from scratch needs guts.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I liked the independent world, because it relates to my venture, the venture capital, Agal or Hat. And at the same time, the independent world started getting attention. And one of the reasons why independence also started getting attention is, as you know, today in the watch world, the mainstream brands started to limit supply. Today, if you want to buy a specific brand, it's not as easy as walking in. You have to build a profile. Today with certain watch brands, you need to build a profile. You need to have certain number of purchases in order for you to
Why
get
so, if I
access.
may ask?
See, production is limited. The watch industry is a huge industry. And today, Switzerland sits on a tremendous ecosystem. And when I say a tremendous ecosystem, companies today, when we produce a watch, there's a lot that goes into this timepiece on our wrist. The crown, from the case up to the screws, the hairspring. So there are so many details, the jewels. It's a whole industry. There are different companies that secure the dials, the jewels, the screws, and demand is increasing year by year, and supply is always an issue. So that's why today a lot of the big brands have serious supply issue. There's a lot of demand, but they don't have the capacity to produce, and that has pushed a lot of the mainstream brands to lower production to ensure quality is maintained. They increase supply and they increase production once they are 100% sure they can maintain quality, they can secure parts. Like the car industry, the watch industry is as big as any other industry, like the car industry and what have you. So that's why today, with certain mainstream brands, there was always a limitation in terms of the number of watches, because there's a lot of big demand. These brands want to maintain credibility. So they maintain supply, production, and production increases only when they secure parts and they maintain quality control.
I want to go back to the idea of building a profile with these mainstream companies. So, what do you mean by building a profile? So, I have to have a
So
number of purchases.
previously with a lot of the mainstream brands, and don't like to, anybody in the watch industry would know, but I would not like to specify a brand. Today, or previously, let's say in the early 2000s, 90s, you can walk into any mainstream brand, any watch available, you can pay the price tag, you get the watch and you go.
Done.
Now, with issues and COVID played a very important role in this.
Mm-hmm.
When COVID hit, a lot of industries got impacted,
Correct.
and the watch industry was one of the main industries that got hit. So today there are a lot of factories that had halts, closures, issues with supply. Imagine contracts being cut. So that impacted basically the watch industry. with that in mind, and of course, again, precious metals also going up because
Yes.
gold, silver, steel play a very big role
Mhm.
in also the industry. So that kind of affected production, affected. So today, mainstream brands don't have the capability to produce the number of watches and the volumes they used to to produce before. In addition, demand is increasing. Awareness for watches, and also social media, by the way, helped. Previously, in the early 2000s and let's say late 19s, in the late 1900s, people who wore watches were the bankers, the businessmen, watches were not as, highly, I would say, not, I don't want to use the word demanded, but not everybody would wear a watch. When the technology era and the innovation era came on board, Instagram was also a very strong source of promoting the wear of watches, where you see bloggers, you see influencers, you see sports
Figures.
figures, businessmen wearing watches, and Instagram being also a very important player in advertising for watches. So
What about
that
other social media channels or Instagram specifically? Is
Instagram specifically, but other media, but Instagram specifically helped. You see, Instagram helped two industries: food. As you'd recall, when Instagram started, it was you taking a picture of what you're eating,
mm,
and then luxury brands like watches, fashion,
mm,
etc. So with watches, people started, especially in the, I would say, the early 2000s, mid 2000s, people started to also, and with social media and with Instagram and the likes, demand for watches started to increase. So companies couldn't comply with the supply. When COVID hit, it made it even worse. Factories got impacted, and there was a shortage in parts. So all of that kind of impacted. So that's why today a lot of the mainstream brands say we will offer you these watches, but you need to open a profile. And also, what also got a lot of these mainstream brands to go that route is trading. See, today a lot of people think that watches are like stocks. Now, from a personal perspective, I always say a watch is an asset, but it's not something like stocks. People go with the craze of let me buy this watch and I'll flip it. There was a lot of flipping and trading, and
what
that
do you mean by
also
flipping, if I may ask?
you buy a watch, let's say you buy a certain high-end Rolex that there's demand. The next day you go put it in the gray market to sell it for 20% more. So that's flipping. That's called,
Okay,
so
okay,
this term in the watch industry is used as flipping.
okay,
So you buy it, you flip it the next day, you sell it the next day at a premium.
okay.
So that also affected brands because brands don't want their watches to, they want their watches to be worn. They don't want their watches to be bought and then on the next day being traded at higher premiums or being discounted or. So all of these factors played a role basically in getting the watch brands pushing towards or having a model where you need to open a profile to get certain watches. So
Mm.
you're a watch collector. If you want a high demanded watch, in order for you to get it, you need to build basically this profile. I need to add the fourth
Yeah, exactly.
sector because we went into
Mhm.
others, other topics. The fourth segment within the watch industry is are micro brands,
Michael?
and they are a another version of independence, but affordable. See, independence is more high end. The affordable version of independence is the micro brands, and the micro brands are also close to my heart because again they fall under the startup realm. So with micro brands being the fourth segment, micro brands were set up by designers or usually entrepreneurs, very smart entrepreneurs that really knew the watch industry or were part of the watch industry, but were not usually master watchmakers. They created a design, used the internet as online shops and platforms, started basically developing concepts, a concept of a brand, selling online or on Kickstarter, and then basically growing. But the watches get produced or assembled in Far East Asia. They would have Swiss movements or Japanese movements, but the assembly happens in Far East Asia. It's an online platform, and basically it becomes a big hip, and a big hype with trends and fashion. A lot of bloggers start to wear these watches, and basically a hype starts, and then these brands start to grow.
So in a sense, if I may, let's say, kind of trying to connect things together between independent and
Micro.
micro brand. So independent is
M-
a master watch, master.
Master watchmakers, high end. Micro is affordable, usually assembly. You don't see a lot of the handwork or
Exactly.
the craftsmanship go into these watches. They have nice concepts, nice ideas,
Trendy in a sense.
trends, but with nice movements, well and well-known strong movements that they use within the Swiss or Japanese Swiss industry. So accredited movements, they just assemble, and basically they have a story, or the brand has a story or an
Okay.
ethos. So as we said, we will summarize the ecosystem into four segments:
Mm,
mainstream,
yes.
independent, fashion, and micro brands.
Okay. So for me to remember, mainstream, fashion, independent,
And micro brands.
and so okay. Let's assume a scenario. Okay. Someone comes to you and he says, he or she, again, I want to hear what kind of questions will you ask on that, because I believe you're also consulting when it comes to buying watches. So he comes to you and he says, I want to buy my first watch. What kind of questions do you ask, and what do you usually recommend?
Okay. Now, when you're new to the watch world, and you'd always find this with the biggest collectors, wear what you like.
What?
Wear what you like.
Where would you like? Okay.
Now, not what you think will make you look good.
Okay.
So if you're new, or even with big collectors, you'd see big collectors wearing as low as a Casio or a Timex digital,
Mm-hmm.
and you would see them wear as high as a Tourbillon with the biggest brands that cost. So, a Timex or an entry level digital watch with 100 to 100 or 200 USD dollars, up to $1 million watches, or a Richard Mille or what have
Mm-hmm.
you. So today I would always, my advice to the new, I would say someone who's just getting into it, wear, first of all, have the mentality of wearing what you like. Don't go after trends, because a watch is more than just a trend. If you really understand what goes into the watch that gets developed, you would go after a watch. And that's what a lot of collectors do. The significant majority of sophisticated collectors would go for something they don't care. They can afford buying a watch for 100,000 francs, or they can buy a watch for 200 francs, or 7,000 reals, or for a watch as much as 400 or 500,000 reals. I would always advise someone new to understand the watch. Don't go and buy something you don't understand. This brings us into movements. Now, don't want to, go into more deeper, but just to summarize, the watch industry, the watches have different movements. So today the movements are divided into three: mechanical, which is hand winding,
Mm-hmm. The
and then
classical ones,
the
right?
classical ones, of course. And today, most of the hand winding is one of the most adored movements today amongst the
Mm.
collector realm.
I have
Two,
one right now. It's amazing.
two is the automatic, mechanical but automatic. And mechanical automatic, basically, with movement. So you don't need to wind the watch. You actually don't need to wind it. So it works with the movement of the hands. And there's
Okay.
a router
Mm-hmm.
that helps basically. And you don't see a router in a manual wind.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third is quartz. Quartz is battery, so you don't need to basically either adjust the watch or wind it, because it runs by batteries.
Mm-hmm.
So these are the three main segments within the, and of course there's innovation and enhancements within each of the three.
Mm-hmm.
So for a new person who's getting into the watch collecting, into watch collecting, I would advise, as I said, get what you feel looks good on you. Don't follow trends. Go for something you can afford and understand, and then build your collection. So today, let's say if you're a newly employed person, you got your first bonus, you want to gift yourself something, don't go and take something that's very expensive.
Mm.
Get something entry level, a good respectable brand, whether it's quartz, whether it's automatic.
Does it go independent or stream or
I
fast?
wouldn't advise somebody going independent from day one
Mhm.
because you're just starting the journey. So read more about so look at, let's say today, if you're getting into the affordable, I would always advise start affordable, even if you can afford to buy the most expensive watch. But you're new, understand
The craftsmanship.
the not just but understand how, for example, the movements, the price points, the history of the company. You like something, start with something moderate, and then build your collection as you go, and go higher as you go higher, and you get to educate yourself more into watches.
Okay, what watch collectors aside, a normal person comes
And
into
that's what I'm saying
uh,
about a normal
uh,
person.
so
So a normal person that comes and says, I want to get a watch, what do I get? I would first thing say, get something that looks nice,
mhm.
that you like. It's you, it's your character, it's what you like. And then two, get something that you can afford. And three, when you want to get something you afford, understand what you're buying and the history of the brand that you're buying, and then take the decision.
Why do I have to understand the history?
Because it makes a big, as I said today, a timepiece on your wrist has a story. It's not just a watch that tells you time. If you really look into the details of how this company set up, who set it up, what has he done, what innovations did he develop or did the company develop, this makes the difference. See, now I believe I can see it in your eyes as well.
Mhm.
You it's opening up things to you that these are things I never thought about in a watch. When I go get a watch, I go get a watch because this brand is very well known.
It looks good. It looks nice.
It
Yeah.
looks nice. But there's more to a watch than just looking nice, than, yani, looking, for example, a brand like Blancpain today is one of the first of, I believe, the first watches that started diving watches. So the
Diving.
whole era of diving watches, we've got a brand that is the pioneer. Not a lot of people know this. Today, for example, there is all of us know Porsche.
Mm-hmm.
A Porsche design, the car, Porsche design is a German company as well that has a line for doing apparel, shoes, bags, suitcases, and watches. Today, they previously partnered with a company um, that developed the first DLC case. DLC is black coating of steel. Uh, and they did this with a very well-known Swiss company, and they were the first and pioneers, basically, in the watch industry that developed a watch of that sort. For example, IWC are well known for their pilot watches. Their pilot watches were used in the World War with pilots. So there's more towards a watch versus basically just putting it on your wrist. So that's why go see the history.
Mm.
There is a brand called Nevada Gretchen. The first watches that went to the Antarctic
Mm.
were owned by this brand, and even they have a line called the Antarctic. Uh, so the point I'm trying to mention is there is a history behind every timepiece that you put on your wrist.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very good for someone who is getting into watches, understanding the history of these watches, how they started, who started them. That itself takes you through a journey.
To a different dimension in a sense.
Yes.
And while you were just talking about it, I just came into my mind. But out of the questions that you would ask anyone to have a watch, you didn't mention like what's your position. So would an executive, for example, of a high managerial level, would treat watches or look at watches different than a normal entry level employee, or should be the same as?
Yeah, not the end. It depends on the character of the person. Now, each person is unique. He has his own character. But today, of course, that's why within the watch industry itself, there are different segments or different, I would say, designs and segments. So today, executives usually don't wear funky watches at work. Although in today's time, yes, because today we're living in a different era, different. But usually, that's why a lot of the watch companies and brands have the dress watch line. So the dress watch line are more conservative, classical, and you see them with executives um, being more, executives, mainly bankers and what have you, or going more conservative with these watches. And then you have the other side where, the youngsters, the younger generation, the young entrepreneurs, young founders are more hip. You see them going into,
Mhm,
and there are also watches that are for, as I said, diving. So today, people who are executives would actually buy watches, dress watches, because they're executives. They want something toned down. But when they want to go diving, swimming, they would have a dive watch. When they want, certain complications or pilot watches or what have you. So it's a mix. What's interesting is, well, I think I'll bring the example of Rolex as well.
mhm,
Today, executive Rolex, everybody wants a Rolex. There are diving watches and Rolexes.
mhm,
Today, executives are wearing diver watches. So the era of even diving watches worn by executives during meetings has become now normal. So Rolex has disrupted this. Similarly, brands like Black Pan, they were too classic. They created the diving line. Today, you see people wearing diver watches, and these diver watches are being basically, executive or professional watches during weddings or banquets, or you will see also different types of watches, not necessarily reflecting the. So I would say today it's a mix, and people wear whatever they like. So
mhm.
the person basically, but بالعرف in Arabic, or let's say,
Normal
norm with a
circumstances.
norm. Usually, you see executives wear, professional watches or classical watches, and then during events they wear different types of watches and so forth.
Okay, there was a time, I believe, maybe 2 or 3 years ago. I saw a clip of one of the very well-known CEOs across the United States, and he was talking about this scenario that happened to him, or kind of situation that happened. Was he was in on a train, and he was admiring his watch. He's a very, very sophisticated watch collector. So he had his hand on a watch, and he was looking at the watch. A lady next to him asked him, "What time is it?" He looked at her and he said, "I don't know. You have a watch." That I'm not looking at the time. I'm only admiring its view, its craftsmanship, its all details, and so on and so forth. So me myself as Murtala, I don't really look at that. I see watches as efficiency. So I look at what time is it. I only look at my watch on a glimpse. I know what time is it. So how do you kind of put these things together? So how do you tell the sophisticated watch collector that okay, a watch is also for efficiency and look at what time is it rather than the details? And for me personally, how do I get to that level of looking at each and every detail of a watch so that some people might not truly appreciate or admire the craftsmanship
Correct.
in a watch?
So see, today within, again, the watch realm or the watch community, you've got different types of owners.
Mhm,
So you have the owner of a watch who wears a watch for the sake of knowing time. So, this person could be a simple employee up to a billionaire. A watch doesn't make anything. It's just a tool that tells the time. So usually, that character or person, basically just gets a watch for the sake of knowing time. Some people don't wear watches and they say, I don't need a watch. I have a mobile, I have a digital, watch with me. It does the job. So that's one segment. The segment you're talking about is when it's more on the sophisticated collectors. And usually these sophisticated collectors could be, normal people up to senior executives and founders, successful founders that created unicorns.
Kevin O'Leary, maybe you've
Uh,
heard of the guy. Kevin O'Leary. Yes,
yes.
Kevin O'Leary.
Kevin, of course, he's a pioneer. He's a businessman,
Yes,
a well-known figure in the business
yes,
world, and he's a watch lover.
correct.
Today, Mark Zuckerberg, for example, in Facebook, recently became a very well-known watch lover as well.
Mhm,
He started with technology. He's a techie. He's a tech, but you started noticing that he started really getting sophisticated
mhm,
watches.
mhm.
So usually with sophisticated collectors, this definitely makes it is something that they look into when they purchase a watch. The craftsmanship, the mechanics, not just the artisan craftsmanship, but also the mechanics. Uh, who is behind the brand, who's behind it, the story behind the piece. So that makes a difference. So today you've got these two characters: a sophisticated collector. It's not just telling time. It's telling time and the story behind the watch and what goes into the watch that he would want to enjoy. But a normal person who just wants to know the time. So I hope maybe
Yes,
the-
so my thing is, but for example, myself, so how do I look at it and say, okay, so do I have to really go and study more about watches for me to further look at my watch, or anybody to look at their watch and say, okay, yes.
it's a passion, Martaba. At
Mm.
the end of the day, if you have a passion for watches, so usually with watch collectors, four things are mainly in common between them.
Four things.
So they love watches, of course.
Hmm.
Cigars is another thing.
They go hand in hand.
Yes.
Okay.
Cars and coffee.
Coffee. Okay.
See, you would always, in any watch community, you would always see someone, they all love coffee. They all like cigars. Of course, not all, but a significant and a good chunk
Mhm,
of cars, even if they can't afford these cars, but they're part of the community, let's say, who love
mhm,
cars
mhm.
and watches. And they go somewhat hand in hand. And coming with that,
Does tea also include in these five?
sorry?
Does tea also include with, these four things? Can tea be added as well?
Tea, frankly, no. I haven't
Okay.
seen, but but it's usually today with a lot of the
So I
communities,
cannot be a part of your community.
of course you can. So yeah, and today a good chunk of the community, because again, if you notice, coffee and cigars go hand in hand,
Yes, in a sense.
and then because of people having their cigars and coffee, the watch is the next thing that gets eyes get the focus on.
Mm,
So that's where basically it kind of
mm,
builds up together. But these are four, and coming up to that point, see, also the buildup of communities is very important,
mhm,
and this also helped a lot in the watch industry. The collector communities, getting people together, and again, Instagram also helped this. Now, if you
mm,
if you really looked at if you look at how they shaped up with time, previously, and even till this date, there's a lot of watch collectors that don't want to showcase what they have. They just want to share their passion with
mhm,
someone who also likes watches. So a lot of people created Instagram accounts, and with a lot of the collectors, by the way,
mm.
you don't see them using their own names.
Why so?
They don't. They want to be discreet. They
Okay.
don't want to show off. And I own these watches, or I have access, and these are the watches I own.
Mm,
But they want to share their
passion.
passion.
Okay.
So this is where a lot of people started setting up their Instagram
Mm,
accounts. Wrist fan, wrist this, 10 past 10. So you have a lot of names related to slang in the industry. and then you don't see the person behind, but you see his wrist and you see the watches or them
Mhm.
posting watches.
Mhm.
This evolved into, a lot of these, for example, let's say in Saudi Arabia, this evolved into a lot of people. Now, when you go on Instagram and click all your follows or watches and people,
Mm.
so the algorithm helps you,
Yes.
connect with others. So you see others, you see they're in Saudi Arabia, boom, you go
Okay.
try to click and become a follower or connect with that person. And then these friendships started to build.
Are there many?
Yes.
Mm.
This helped the creation of communities and clubs.
Mhm.
So this was the start, this was like the flair.
Mhm.
And that's where communities and clubs started to come on board.
Mhm.
So you have watch collector clubs. Everybody who's passionate about
Mhm.
watchmaking created a club, joined together, and they meet, greet, dine, and speak about watches. And as I said, you remember I told you that coffee and
Yes.
so this also goes in line. They go for a cigar, they go for a coffee, they discuss watches, they go back and forth. So it became a community. And I'm proud to be a member of the first ever Saudi licensed watch club, which is the Collectors Watch Club,
Mhm.
led by my brothers Mahmoud Sami Attar and Abdulaziz Hanif.
Shout out. Okay.
They are the ones that set up this club. Today, it is the first licensed watch club.
Is it sponsored by one of the mainstream companies or something? Or?
No, no. So basically this is a community, a
Mm.
non-profit organization,
Okay.
which is a community, and we're licensed on Howie, and it
Okay.
is the first ever licensed watch club.
Mhm.
Today we have reached around 140 members, and
MashaAllah.
imagine 140 members, all in love with watches,
Mhm.
all, and we became a soft power
Mhm.
that enabled a lot of the watch brands actually to knock on our doors,
Uh,
want to do collaborations with us, and we launched a couple of very well-known
in
brands.
what sense of collaboration, if I may ask?
So when it comes to collaborations, for example, this year we launched one of the first ever Piaget with Piaget, a 45-piece limited edition with Piaget under the name Red Sea,
I-
البحر الأحمر.
Independent, right? Independent.
Piaget is part of one of the mainstream corporates,
Okay.
so part of Richmond Group,
Mhm.
and basically Piaget is a very well-known brand.
Mhm.
So today, for example, the club did an affiliation with Piaget. The club did an affiliation with Parmigiani, with Baltic, with
Mm.
a couple of other brands as
A
well.
strategic partner or something.
We do a limited edition.
Okay.
So, because we are a community, that community communicates with the brands, they agree on an edition, and basically that edition becomes owned by the club members.
Okay.
And usually with watch communities and clubs, these clubs are soft powers. So
Mhm.
we have Saudi, the Collectors Watch Club. In other Gulf countries, there are other watch clubs. Singapore, there is a very well-known watch club, the Singapore Watch Club, and other watch clubs basically all over the world.
Mhm.
So again, these communities encouraged and started to grow and are growing by attracting other members to come on board, other members to be educated, and a lot of them offer are an educational platform.
Mhm.
Come be part of the community. You are part of people who like watches. You get educated about watches.
Mhm.
You get to meet, the brands, the CEOs of brands,
Mhm.
get to know history about the brands, and you kind of build your passion and start to go and hurt your wallet and go and try and buy more watches.
So, while you, so I, there's one of the famous, let's say, one of the famous quotes. They say, "Tell me who are the closest five friends, and I'll tell you more about yourself." Does it also apply to watches? So tell me about your watch. I'll tell you about yourself.
Of
Like,
course, watches do tell you about people, especially like you get to read people, but of course, again, there's a huge possibility that you don't read a person with 100%. But if you are in the watch business or you're a watch enthusiast and you're into watches, automatically your eyes would fall onto the wrist of the person next to you.
Mhm.
And it kind of gives you some indication about the person's character.
What
So
indications?
It depends. Now, today, as I said, there are people that don't wear watches. So that doesn't mean, so, usually when you see a person that doesn't wear a watch, he's a sophisticated person, well educated, successful, etc. But he doesn't wear a watch because he doesn't care. Well, time is only a tool. That timekeeping could be managed through your phone, your smart watch, you don't need a watch.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that segment. And usually a lot of people within that segment are the young entrepreneur, especially the young entrepreneurs. They're more tech, they're digital, they don't go to, conventional watches. But then once they sell their companies and become unicorns, they're getting into watches. So, that's one. Two, general people that wear, the normal mainstream brands. You get to start to read about the person when you start seeing them wearing, if you meet them more than once and you start seeing them, especially if you're in the watch business or you're a collector,
Mm-hmm.
when you see them change certain, let's say you meet a person 4 or 5 times,
Mm-hmm.
and then every time you see him, you see he's wearing a different watch.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of, and depending on the watch he wears, gives you, he likes Japanese watches. So if you
So if
see a
it fits a
person,
pattern, for example.
not necessarily, uh for example, someone who likes Japanese, and we have a huge community that loves Japanese, so
Mm-hmm.
that gives you kind of an indication about the person's character. He likes precision Japanese. He doesn't care whether it's automatic or quartz, because automatic, quartz, and the Japanese are very strong when it comes to quartz watches. Somebody who wears independence, usually watches that you don't see worn by a lot of people. This also gives you kind of what character that person is.
Mm-hmm.
There are people who love old school, vintage. They only wear vintage watches. Earlier you were mentioning you had a family member who loves to travel, goes and buys vintage watches,
Through
and then
eBay.
no, or eBay. But again, there is a huge community that likes vintage watches because of their history and what have you.
What are your thoughts on vintage, by the way?
Vintage. Okay, again,
Mm-hmm.
remember when I said each watch has a story and a
Yes.
history? So a lot of these big brands have history, movements that were done for the first time, certain dials, certain models. So again, people who love vintage watches usually like the old school uh, watches. They had history, they had stories. So they love to stick to basically the old school versus the new one.
Mm-hmm. And this one I want to get to your shop, 1010. Actually, 1010. And I just did some research. So I'd like you to get me more about the name itself. So from what I've
Sure.
understood is that 1010 is a specific
It's a
bush.
brand. It's a
It's
brand. We're a
it's
retailer.
again, but the name itself. So 1010 is a specific, let's say, in terms of 1010.
Correct.
So
Correct.
why this time specifically?
I'll give you a bit of a background about how I got into the business.
I
So
guess.
as I mentioned, I'm a venture capitalist. I love venture capital, investing in companies, turnarounds, making companies, big companies. Being a watch collector, and especially that I liked independence. Then usually independents are not your usual watches that you see on wrists of people in the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want to say taboo, but everybody wears mainstream brands. So when they see you wearing an independent, it's like what's this weird brand that you're wearing?
Exactly.
What's this or what is this brand that you're wearing? So because I love independence, I started in the mid 2000s, I would say, or the mid and end 2000s, in supporting. So I have a lot of good connections in Geneva. I travel, I go to the watch fairs, and given I'm a collector, I travel to Geneva a lot, know a lot of people in the industry, whether they were retailers or the watch manufacturers or the likes. That kind of enticed me to get introduced to a lot of the independents and the micro brands. And I started seeing that independents need to come to the region, because again, being a venture capitalist and love the startup world, I saw the potential of independence in our part of the world, and that they will be at some point highly demanded timepieces, and grow. Some of them would grow to become mainstream brands.
But if I may ask, what were the main, let's say, what was your belief at that moment that yes, there will be a time where independent might have a demand in
It's the
the.
person behind it. See, again, relating to venture capital, you invest in the team. And when I knew the person, the master watchmaker, the team, and you would right away know that this team will be able to take this company or this brand to the next level.
Mhm,
So that was a key element.
mhm,
So what drove me was, initially I set up a distribution company. So not retail, distribution, i.e., taking some rights, the retail rights for some brands, and I helped a couple of independent brands and micro brands have a footfall in positioning with retailers in the Middle East and the Gulf region specifically.
mhm,
So started with that company. Of course, we set up. We're a Saudi setup. Set that up. Helped a couple of micro brands and some small independents sign up with retailers in the Gulf region. Expand. But then prior to COVID, I started seeing a problem.
which is.
As I said today, independence did not have proper presence in our region, in our part of the world, and they had difficulty in penetrating the market. Why? Because of conventional retail. Now, in the watch industry, a lot of the retailers are conventional retailers.
Mhm,
They just had nice big stores. The brand would sell itself. So, and it's not just in our part of the world, by the way. This is a global issue.
so not much of a marketing.
They would, a lot of these big retailers all over the world would say our brands, the brands we carry, sell themselves. So there was not much effort. There was, kind of poor customer experience. There was no exclusivity. There was no the service aspect, listening to the client, listening to the customer. Those were missing with a lot of the retailers and even the brands, by the way. So this is where I saw a problem statement and creating a solution to it.
Mhm,
In addition, what attracted me to independence, because independents were smaller and they're dependent mainly on their own manufacture facilities or capabilities, and even if they outsource certain parts and what have you, still they're flexible because they do small quantities. They would listen to the customer, and that also attracted me a lot with independence. See, today when independents started to set up, they don't have retailers because the margins are very low, and they usually do the pitch directly to the client, to the
mhm.
customer.
Direct sale.
Direct sales. So they did that with the internet era, with basically, online platforms being in place. Again, Instagram, as I said, also
That's where Instagram played a part.
played a part where accessibility, their contacts were there. Clients used to contact them through their phones or emails and what have you. We used to travel to Geneva to take appointments and meet the watchmakers, and that experience, meeting the watchmaker, giving and taking with him, telling him what I would like to add into the timepiece. So the flexibility was always there with independence. If you go to a mainstream brand, the mainstream brand will tell you this is the core collection for this year, take it or leave it. I'm not going to do these numerals for you or change the color of the dial or put an engraving of your name. It's take it or leave it. This is my core collection. If I have a limited edition for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, green with the emblem Seven Nakhla, and that's it.
That, so that's what I want to also ask on that regard, and we can talk about that more in depth later. But when it comes to the independent or even stream companies as well, what comes to the cultural adaptability on that regard?
I will come to
When it
that
comes to that, okay.
later down the line when I explain the business model of 1010
Mhm,
Labs. So, but a very good question, and
mhm,
this is a main pillar that we focused on.
mhm,
And we had the flexibility in doing so with a lot of the independent brands versus
Mm.
mainstream. So what got me, as I mentioned, is I set up a distribution company, helped a lot of brands enter into the market here with retailers, helped them also as an advisor with certain models that would work. Again, we have different tastes. It's very interesting. Even in the Gulf region, the taste of a Saudi collector would be completely different from a taste of a Qatari or Bahraini or Emirati or
Mm.
Omani collector.
So I have another, let's say, kind of very let's say, very generic question on that regard. Does the watch industry, in general, because in different industries, different aspects, there is always a subjective side and an objective side. When it comes to watches, where does the subjectivity ends and where does objectivity ends?
Okay, so of course on the objective side, it's a commercial.
Mm-hmm.
It's business.
Okay.
So all these brands, have the objective of commercial, making money. These brands growing. So the objective is basically to make money
We're
and to
talking about, let's say,
commercialize.
for example, watch designs and such and such. Is there any kind of objectivity
Of
in it?
course.
Okay.
So I would say more objectivity being just so there's more objectives in the brand in setting up a watch brand. It's the design aesthetics, the movement, the complication. Of course, it all goes back again, like any other business, and again, like any startup. Remember when we said the addressable market?
Yes.
If I wanted to create a watch brand, what's my addressable market? Is it the affordable market? Is it the mid end? Is it the high end? If it's the high end, what's the price point? What is the design?
Mm-hmm.
Am I coming up with a different design that would
Mm-hmm.
shift so all these get into, but at the end of the day, it's a business.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope that answers your question.
So you said that there are, even within the Gulf region, you have Qatari different, Bahraini is different.
Different tastes, different. So I helped a lot of these brands basically focus some of their lines that would help them sell through their retailers.
Mm-hmm.
That, as I mentioned, I saw the problem statement. That kind of the bulb started to come on board.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where the venture capitalist mindset started to come
So now you are the agal
of the
the
venture
venture
capitalist.
capitalist. Okay.
So this is where I said, let's create a new disruptive concept, not just for Saudi and the Middle East, but beyond on a global level.
Mm-hmm.
So this is where the idea of 1010 Labs came in. So we developed an ecosystem, retail ecosystem, that is phygital, so physical and digital. As you know,
Mm-hmm.
today we're in a digital era. The kingdom today has the most affluent user base buying digitally. Today we're in Riyadh. I was late. I apologize. I was late until we came in because of the traffic. People are becoming more digital affluent, and especially people who know, for example, let's say watches. I don't want to waste time. I click on the website. I buy the watch. It gets delivered. I know the brand. I've tried it. I've seen it. So people are becoming more affluent, and this is evident with a lot of e-commerce platforms today.
Mm-hmm.
Our shmaghs as well. Our Allah yakramk, our
Shoes,
sneakers, our
yes.
shoes, we all buy online today.
Correct.
So that's why 1010 Labs was set up to disrupt. So we have a phygital side and then we have a physical side. So the physical side is we opened a store last year in February in Laysan Valley,
Mm-hmm.
which even, as a structure, we have affordable, mid-end, and high-end, and we've developed the store to cater everyone. But
Mm-hmm.
each brand we have has a story, history, what have you. In addition to this, we have another vertical that we introduced 3 years ago, and this is where I'm coming up to your question. Uh, Putting in our culture today, as Saudi Arabia today has a huge depth of culture, history. We have a lot to give the outside world.
Correct.
Why do we always have to buy products that are coming up the aesthetics and designs and culture and heritage from outside? Today we have a deep rooted rich history, and this is where we wanted to capitalize and disrupt the model as well. I wanted to, and this was my objective from day one, I wanted to work with my partner brands Of course, we're official retailers. So today we retail close to 30 brands. But I wanted to have the watches that I design with my partners, with our deep heritage, on the wrists of Americans, Japanese, Koreans, you name it, people from subcontinent Asia. My target was to put Saudi inspired watches
On
on
the
the
map.
wrists on the wrists of global collectors. And this is where we introduced a line called Nawat. And
What?
even the selection of the name has a
The
purpose.
pulp, or not the pulp, sorry.
Nawa is the seed,
Or the okay, yes, yes, the
the
seed.
seed. Nawat. So Nawat stands for nature, architecture, wildlife, arts, and time. 5 elements that we take from this beautiful land of ours,
Mm-hmm.
and we inspire these 5 elements into watches. So we changed the concept of a Saudi edition has to be green, the palm tree and the 2 swords, the emblem.
It's more than that.
So it's more than that. And we have deep, deep, deep culture, heritage, architecture, inspirations that we basically from these elements that we put into watches. So that's where the Nawat line started 3 years ago. We had a huge event. When we offered it 400 collectors in the 4 seasons, and we launched it. Now coming back to your question, 1010 Labs. The reason why I selected 1010, I think now you're seeing the overall concept. It's having a disruptive retail model in out of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and being a first entrant in the independent world, offering independent watches to collectors here. Having a name that rings globally, and we are working towards being a soft power with a Saudi voice globally with luxury watchmaking. And the third element that will help us is the Nawat line. So when we chose 1010 Labs as a name, we wanted to have a hip name, very easy to pronounce. It would be easy to pronounce by local, Saudi, Gulf, Middle Eastern, Gulf national or Middle Eastern, as well as it relates to the West and the East. So 1010, 10 past 10, and the reason why I selected it, when I was studying in the university, I love marketing as well. So I'm a finance major, finance economics major, and marketing minor
Mm-hmm.
with marketing and entrepreneurship minor.
Okay.
So on the marketing side, I remember one of my first assignments was a watch advertisement. And that watch ad, in any watch ad that you see, you'd always find 10 past 10, 10:10. And there is a reason behind it.
Which is
A logo would always be present. The best positioning for a logo of a watch
on the 12th.
would be very well seen when it's 10 past 10.
Why?
When it's 10 past, so it could be on the 12, on the 6, on the side, on the other side, anywhere you position a watch logo within the realm of a watch, the best way to see it is when it's at 10:10.
So it's seen on all
All
angles.
across. So whether you put the logo on the top, on the 12 position, 6 o'clock position, 3 o'clock position, 9 o'clock, wherever you put it on the
Okay,
side.
I see. Now I get it.
So that's where we said 10:10. In our logo, we have a digitized, 10:10, not your, that is to showcase that we are a modern technology company as well. So retail we're an online retailer as well, other than physical. So that's the digital era.
Mm-hmm.
And labs is where the magic happens. This
Okay.
is where we have a lab and a studio where we develop using the Nawat elements, basically the Saudi inspired elements into watches. And lillah alhamdu wal minna, we have been blessed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that since the last 3 years, our watches, we've done over 44 limited editions with Saudi heritage. And we had a good chunk of our watches being nominated for GPHG, which is the Oscars of watchmaking.
Okay. So there's an annual award for.
There is an annual award. Some of our pieces that had the Nawat line were nominated. We have been showcased on the major platforms, international platforms for watches who showcased our work, being Monochrome, Fratello, Worn and Wound in the US. So these are all very well known media outlets and platforms about the watch industry that actually showcased our work.
Mm-hmm.
So this is where 1010 Labs come, the name comes from, or the concept of the name come from, our business model, which is digital, physical, and then the Saudi line, Nawat,
The cultural
the
aspect.
cultural aspect, and basically the main, Nawat being the main vertical of transforming these pieces that we work with our partners and getting them out globally. To give you a few examples, and this was like, alhamdulillah, a big hit for us. One of our partner brands is a German brand called Kudoke.
Kudoke.
Kudoke, yes.
So it's more like a Japanese name.
No, it's not. Everybody says it, but it's not. He's German. He's hardcore German. Stefan Kudoke is one of the leading independent watchmakers in Germany, as well as also globally. His name is very well recognized in the independent world. We developed a limited edition with him under the name of Saif al-Ajrab, or the Ajrab sword. And
Okay.
the
Okay.
Ajrab sword, historically, is very close to our hearts in the
Mm.
Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Al-Imam Turki,
Mhm.
it's his sword. So it has a lot of historical significance as a sword. So basically, we developed a watch with unique mechanical parameters based on the Kudoki 3 with Al-Ajrab, Saif Al-Ajrab, or the Ajrab sword in it. We did 24 pieces. We even became a bit creative when it came to the numbering the watches. We numbered the watches 2309, for example, 01, 230902, which is the National Day.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Uh,
Okay.
so we did 24 pieces. Lillah alhamdu wal minna, and when blessings to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, over 50% of the production was sold globally. Today we
Mhm.
have collectors in the US, Japan, Korea, the UK, France, India, and interestingly, the last collector was a very high profile collector from the Philippines that
Okay.
actually bought the watch. Imagine a Saudi inspired watch, Saif al Ajrab,
So it reached
is,
that level.
and that is our goal. See, when I say today we are working towards being a soft power of showcasing our deep rooted heritage in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which we're proud of, into luxury watchmaking and making people, through our partner brands, basically wear pieces that were specifically curated with our heritage.
Mm.
So this was one of the success stories that we had. We had also another brand, it's a Swiss French brand called Byron, where we created a line called Arqam, or an edition called Arqam, and this was nominated for GPHE.
Mhm.
So this watch tells you the story of numerology in the Arabian Peninsula.
Okay.
The numbers, the mechanics are very interesting, where the numbers flip and change after every 48 hours.
Okay.
So they change. So they start with, we introduced for the first time of watchmaking history, Nabatean numerals. And the Nabateans are, Arabs, and they're in an ancient civilization in the Arabian Peninsula. So we had Nabatean numerals, Misnad numerals, which are one of the first also Semitic numerals today seen engraved. You see these alphabets and numerals engraved in Junub al-Mamlaka, and in the southern side
Okay.
of the kingdom. You see it in Al-Ula.
Okay.
So then they shift to the Misnad numerals, and then they shift to Arabic, which is currently called Western Arabic numerals, and then they shift to Hindu Arabic numerals, which today is known as the
Like
Arabic numerals.
4
So
shifts.
four shifts, so you have the whole history of numerology of the Arabian Peninsula on your wrist.
Wow.
So these are the likes of concepts that, or inspirations, that we develop with our partner brands,
Mhm.
and basically we curate with them.
No, I'm quite interested because actually, Nawat, I got a glimpse of it, to be honest. I just saw a glimpse of it while I was doing some research. What I want to ask more is about the cultural influence. So, what did the feedback that you got from your people? Did they say that, okay, wow, we didn't know that Saudi Arabia had that enrichment?
Yes. Now, for example, today one of our brand partners as well, Armin Strom, we did a watch on that was inspired by Jebel al-Lawz.
Okay. Mashallah.
So Jabal al-Lawz today, even some Saudis know there is a mountain, but they got more, let's say, enticed by the mountain. Why is the watch named under the mountain? They started doing more research about the mountain.
Okay.
Similarly, I believe, frankly today with Saudi collectors, we are doing something that is part of our culture and we're proud of it. But it's speaking to us. See, for a Saudi collector, this timepiece with our Saudi elements is speaking to us directly.
Hmm.
It is close to us. We are proud of our heritage. We are proud of our history. We are proud of our, our topography and geography.
Hmm.
So today, having a piece that relates to you and speaks to you, of course, will definitely entice you more than a piece just that looks good.
Hmm.
It's twice as better right now.
Correct.
Today, what we have as a target as well is to create an heirloom. See,
A
that's
what?
an heirloom.
Errol.
Irth
Oh,
yurwa.
okay.
But today, watches, by the way, for as men. See, that's why even in the watch industry, we haven't spoken about this, but in the watch industry, men are the main targets. As men, we don't wear gold and jewelry, and our only thing is watches, sabha, pen, and basically that's it.
Yes.
Um, there is nothing much else that basically we utilize as
Yes.
and usually in the watch business, these watches are always you notice a lot of collectors as well, their fathers pass their watches to the sons, or the grandfather passes a watch to his grandchild, and this is
Yes.
how basically the passion starts.
True.
So that's why today it talks to us easier, talks to men much more easier. Now, I'm not, of course, I don't want females to start. If ladies, there's a huge market for ladies. There's a huge, but today the difference is, ladies, you see them go mainly with the mainstream brands. They care more about precious metals, diamonds,
True.
etc., the jewelry part. Men, it's a different case. So that's a major basically element, i.e., the passing off. That's why we want to create an heirloom. Our slogan is an heirloom for future generations.
Mm-hmm.
We want to create timepieces. After 20 years, I would want my collector to actually go and provide his watch to his son,
Mm-hmm.
and he would say that this is one of the first Saudi-inspired watches. So an heirloom for future generations that is
And,
passed by from generation to generation.
and speaking of that, Harlem, I'd like to know from your perspective, and since you are very heavily involved in that, how do you foresee watches manufacturing in Saudi Arabia in the upcoming 5, 10 years?
That is one objective we have. See, when I set up this business, of course, retail was part of it. Getting Saudi heritage was another part. And the third is to get in production and create our own brands.
Mm-hmm.
It's not impossible. Today, we have all what it takes. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has the talent, has the resources, has the infrastructure, and has the will to execute. See, today, and God bless Musaidi, Allah yahfaz Musaidi, he kept a vision, which is transpired into Vision 2030, and we're seeing it being executed when everybody, especially the international side, like it's good to have a vision, but let's see what happens. But we are executing.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe, and I kept this as an objective for me. And I hope with whatever hard work we do, that we bring watch production to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, have a hand in having the watch industry, let's say, even if a flair,
Mm-hmm.
being a part that initiates the flair towards bringing the watch industry to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and actually
So,
creating an industry. And it's not impossible.
so that's our the Saudi watches be recognized worldwide.
This is, inshallah, the aim. Now, there are, and I believe they deserve to be mentioned, there are a couple of entrepreneurs that actually, and they're Saudi, they started their own watch brands. They started, of course, because again, it's not easy. It's not as easy as said. Today, you can say, "I want to get a watch brand," but having a full-fledged ecosystem is not easy.
Mm-hmm.
You need to build it with time. But there are a couple of founders that set up Saudi watch brands. utilizing the infrastructure of Switzerland or Southeast Asia, but there are brands that came to life, and we have a very good example today. Brother Hamad Al Murri, Ferlan Murri today is a
Mm-hmm.
very well-known brand. I lift my regal to him and salute him today.
Salute.
He started from a simple idea until today. He became recognized, and it's done by by Saudis,
Mm-hmm.
like a Saudi Swiss, but the Saudi founder. There are other brands that are coming up, so they need to be recognized. And I said, we and myself as with my business at 1010 Labs, I hope that we ignite a flare. Now I would work towards the ultimate end to ensure that we actually bring production to the kingdom. There are plans. We do have plans of setting up brands, our own Saudi brands here, inshallah, very soon. But I would hope that we are either a flare that ignites this or be part of an ecosystem and industry that actually is being developed in Saudi Arabia.
Inshallah. And with that, I believe we're almost getting at the end. And usually we end our interview with these two questions. And this question I'd like you to help me with. Is there any question that you would have hoped that we asked?
And maybe I think you asked most of the questions, but I would say maybe more about the watch industry or getting into. I think we covered. Oh, I think, mashallah, we covered
Because
most of the points.
again, not everyone watch is gonna be a watch collector. Because even, for example, myself, I'm a one-on-one person. So even when I went with my cousin to watches, and when he tried to explain watch industry to me, at a certain moment, I was like, "What are you saying?" I froze because, again, and I believe this the idea. Me personally, I believe others might share this opinion. It's not about the brand itself; it's about how it looks. So, for example, if I see someone from afar, and the watch, even if it's a micro brand, but if it looks luxurious, I would immediately label it as a luxurious brand,
Yeah.
even though I don't know that much about it. So I believe. Oh, this what might bring me in. What is the biggest misconception that you feel the normal people, not watch collectors, normal people, everyday people, have about watches? What's the greatest misconception that they have?
Yeah, I believe today, not misconception by say, but people today follow brands versus understanding again what goes into the watch and the history of the watch. What I would say is there needs to be a lot of education towards educating people towards that this is a tool, yes, that will help you with time, but there's much more that goes into it. And you would buy a watch that is closer to your character, closer versus just running after a brand, and a specific brand.
Mhm.
And that education is being built, but I believe it still needs a bit of further time. You
Where
see,
is it being built, if I may ask?
today we play a role. The new retailers on the ground, whether it's 1010 Labs or whether it's our brothers and sisters who are setting up similar businesses or similar retail. I believe today the new retailers that are coming into the market are building that education.
Mm-hmm.
So, again, and conventional retailers started to realize that business has changed
Mm-hmm.
and they need to, go with the change. We واكب so that education started to increase. Even the brands themselves started to educate.
Mm-hmm.
See, as I said, also, what's helping is exposure.
Mm-hmm.
Today, people have exposure to social media today. As I said, Instagram and other social media platforms played a huge role in building up, watch collecting and love of watches. When people travel, it's also
Play the role.
played a role. Communities, the watch clubs, retailers started bringing in educational materials, started gathering collectors and clients, and giving them sessions, watchmaking sessions. There's a lot going on, and again, retailers, as I mentioned today, are also changing. They're educating their clients
Mm-hmm.
to attract further clients.
Okay. Okay. Now, lastly, which is the question that usually ends with. the brain, the name comes in, bridge. So from your perspective, I'm gonna say like a one word that would bridge the gap between what people know and watches. What's the thing that would bridge the gap between them, other than education? We just mentioned education, but what else?
I would say in small, a watch is not just to tell time. There's much more that goes into this timepiece that you need to learn about. And
Mm-hmm.
I believe once you do, you will open up your eyes to a very big spectrum of an industry. You know, you'd think this is a small, tiny industry, but there's a lot going on this thing that sits on your wrist.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Khaled.
Allah يبارك.